Everyone, me again. I'm here to explain the critical reading method from the PSAT. What I'd like to do is go through some of the strategies and how to take notes for this passage or the passages in particular to make it easier for you to get through the passages without having to memorize everything and feel like you have to scan all the information before you answer the questions. So let's start with the types of reading passages that you'll encounter. Generally, the first passage is literature. So I'm working out of order here, but the literature passage can be taken from anything. From Jane Austen, we're going to read a piece of Emma, to anything that could be for more modern times. Usually the voice is somewhere late 1700s to early 20th century. So that's sort of the types of literature passages that I've encountered over the, let's say, 12 tests that have been released by College Board total. The next component would be women's history and American history or government. It's often this juxtaposition of men wanting to maintain a patriarchal society and women sort of expressing and explaining why they should have rights. So if you see a man versus woman sort of 17, 18, early 1900s, you usually know that that's the issue. The ladies want the rights and the guys are saying, you can't control it yet. So there's sort of this push and pull between the two passages. They often wind up being the compare and contrast passages. The next component would be social science, humanities, and economics. They all seem to go together. There are a lot of questions about sort of transit and society and how cars function in our cities and traffic and non-genetically modified foods and economics passages of how people spend money and sort of spending habits. And then we have natural science. I have read a lot of passages about DNA, a lot of passages about genetic modification. These are the types of passages that you'll come across here, sometimes about space. And if you're ever feeling like you're lacking in a particular area, one good way to sort of supplement some of the reading is to read The Week. It compiles a lot of the best news media in our country and around the world into a very easy magazine to read. But there's a particular page that basically focuses on government, politics, social science, humanities, natural science. And so if you can start to learn how these writers write, it makes it a lot easier to unpack what they have in the passages. Of course, then we have our compare and contrast passages. And my advice there is that you always read passage 1 and then answer any of the questions about passage 1 first. You'll notice that they'll go in order. And then read passage 2 and answer the questions about passage 2 and then compare and contrast those two passages. Just makes it easier to retain and understand the information. So the reading method is really a 4-step process. The first step is that I ask you to read the intro to the passage before anything else. And a lot of students will say, well, why? They just jump right into the passage. Well, it's really important because you want to establish who wrote the passage through tone, gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, and time period. All of these factors shape the way that people converse with one another and the way that they try to portray their characters in the passage. So practice test number 1 in the SAT book, it's this passage about a woman named Chi and her daughter Naomi, and they're members of the House of Fuji, a noble family in Japan in the year 1920. So if you understand who's in control of Japan in 1920, it's an emperor. There's a lot of tradition about anything surrounding sort of the ruling class families. You can understand sort of why the passage goes the way that it goes for practice test 1, passage 1. Here tonight, we are going to read about Emma. It's a Jane Austen novel, originally published in 1815. Again, here we are talking about a British author conveying sort of a female's thought process in the early 1800s. So in my mind, I imagine big dresses with petticoats and sort of a bonnet and horse and carriage and low, beautiful stone walls in the English countryside. So these pictures in your mind really shape how you're able to jump into the passage and understand and unpack the passage. So I mentioned in the previous video that we don't really want to focus on the questions first. course, the questions are really important. You have to answer the questions and read them carefully, but the passages are what drive the question. So if you really understand the content and you're able to unpack it, it makes it a lot easier. And reading the intro is that first step, because it's like turning the lights on in a darkened room and you don't know who's at the surprise party. So if you read it, you kind of have a little inkling of who's going to be there and sort of how the story is going to unfold. The second step is that you want to organize the passage into manageable pieces. Brains can remember only so much content, so help your brain out. Don't exhaust it right away. You want to break it into chunks of 5, 10, 15 lines at a time, depending on the content. For the Jane Austen novel, I could probably handle about 10 or 12 lines of this without sort of spacing out, especially tired and reading a lot of content all day. I know you guys are, it's a lot to do, especially if you're going to sit down and do a PSAT, but I would personally mark it off, and you'll see what I'm going to do with the pointer here in a couple of minutes. So I would break the passage and tell your brain, I'm going to stop here and write a main idea note. So as soon as you're done reading the intro, mark off your passage into manageable pieces, and then that's how you're going to attack it. If it's literature, you read so much fiction that you probably can handle about 10 or 15 lines. But if it's anything else, like really technical science, 5 lines, maybe 1 line at a time. It just depends on sort of what they're talking about and if you've had any prior experience. So part 2. So now let's assume that you've organized your passage into manageable pieces, and now it's time to read each segment and take notes. So you're going to read a segment and annotate, and you're going to write down main ideas, maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 words to summarize what's been going on. When it's a character development, I often circle the character's name and then summarize what has happened in the margin, so then I can write down who had what reaction. I can keep it straight. I do have a note here saying that underlining only helps the eyes track back over the content, whereas note-taking will help the brain critically think and make inferences. So be careful. Try not to become a chronic underliner, because that's just going to rehash how the brain is reading the information on the page. What I want to see is that shift to the critical thinking, the main idea, the inference component of your brain. Be sure to hone in on character development, key ideas, and other information that helps progress. That progresses the conversation, like that keeps it moving forward. Read and annotate everything before answering any of the questions. So you really want to know the content before you jump into the questions. So that leads us to the questions. How do we answer the questions? You want to read the questions carefully. No skimming or skipping. Don't let your eyes track over information. Rephrase the question. Often the SAT will throw confusing words like the word characterize. We all take that as a character analysis, and it's not. It just means to describe. So every time you see characterize, cross it out, write describes. Every time you see the author contend, cross it out, write argues. Every time you see the word function, it means purpose. So rephrase the question, make it easier for you to understand and answer. And the third step here is going to be the most important thing I tell you in any of the videos. It's to think of an answer and write it down before looking at the choices. This means you're putting yourself in control of the process rather than the test controlling you. So make sure you write something down, a word, a symbol, a phrase, something to capture your thought, because your short-term memory will start to fade once you get to letter C and you read the answer, and then you're going to start the debate. Oh, maybe it's A, maybe it's C. If you write down your answer before looking at the choices, that's going to capture what you think it should be, and then you have something to always compare it to. And finally, process of elimination. What you want to do is cross out the word or phrase that makes a statement false, not A, B, C, or D, because that's not going to prove to you why something's wrong. So if you cross off the word or phrase that makes a statement false, it makes it a lot easier. So reading fallacies. So this is the standardized exam. Essentially, all the reading questions fall into 1 to 6 categories. So why read the question ahead? If you practice reading a section or two, you'll get the hang of the types of questions the test maker asks. So focus on the content and then go to the questions at the end. When in doubt, do not answer a question. The new SAT does not penalize for answering questions, so it's wise to always put an answer down in the new exam. So that was a fallacy. When in doubt, do not answer a question. So now you might as well answer everything, right? Because why not try to go for the point? It's 1 out of 4 chance of getting it right. your reading method takes me a long time. I want to go back to skimming. I hear this often. Anything new takes a while to get the hang of. Practice the method. It's like throwing a ball. I was not very good at throwing a softball. I probably hit the catcher and the umpire more times than I ever want to think of, but throwing it over and over and over again, you get more accurate going over the plate. I really shouldn't be talking about softball. I was more of a kickball pitcher, but you get my point. So try it on your next lit assignment or history assignment. Try this reading method and see how by breaking it down by paragraph and page can really help you absorb the content. So practice that annotating skill. What I like to do is to leave a 4x6 card for every chapter when I'm reading a book. So say a novel, pretend it's a Great Gatsby. And after every chapter, I write down main idea notes, key quotes, character development, and then let's say the chapters are only named chapter 1, 2, or 3. So I would say chapter 1, Nick Carraway moves to Long Island to, what is it, Little Egg, I think, right? Or East Egg, right? So that's what I would say. So if you can then capture all of that at the end of reading a novel, if you have all those 4x6 cards, now you have your chapter review. Now you have your notes for your outline for your essay. So if you're efficient when you're working, it makes all of that sort of synthesizing the content easier in the end. So let's